Hey everyone, hope you're doing wonderful. Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to talk about three major concepts in art. They're a little bit on the abstract side, so I'll try to do my best to explain them along with demonstrations and some exercises to practice them. And I want to connect them all together under this idea of your artistic intuition or artistic confidence. So let's jump into chapter one, tempo. Okay, so what is tempo? Well, tempo is kind of like your rhythm or your cadence. It's the speed at which you're drawing, the speed that you're making lines, making shapes. I think a good way to look at this is, or think about it as like a song. There's like a sequence of chords. In this case, that would be lines to create a song, which is the drawing, right? And the essence here is like drawing in the most relaxed way you can, feeling how your pen flows. If you've ever danced before, it's kind of like that feeling, the graceful movement of speeding and slowing with the music and like gliding around the room with your steps. You're just like so entranced and comfortable. I think that's this flow state that we talk about as artists, right? It's kind of thoughtless. You're more feeling your way through what you're doing. And that's kind of what your tempo is. And that relies heavily on your intuition. And so practicing tempo is a great way to get better at your artistic intuition, which is like what you just naturally comes out of your mind when you set to draw without really thinking about it. So the first point that I want to make here that I think is very interesting is how each artist has their own tempo. So not everyone is going to draw and paint at the same set of speeds. Adam Duff from Lucid Pixel, he has an interesting video about slowing down and how relevant that is to his tempo, which if I can find that video, I'll link it. But me personally, I feel more comfortable at a faster tempo. I tend to make a lot of quick lines. You can see here in these demonstrations, I have the first few at 1x speed. And I'm going to talk about this exercise of drawing this way in a second. But first, I want to kind of explain intuition a little more. So your intuition is like your subconscious ability to recall aesthetics. And you recall that from your visual library. So in other words, your intuition, your artistic intuition, is how well you can discern what's visually appealing without thinking too much. Building confidence in your intuition will help you to more comfortably enter a flow state when your desired tempo aligns with your actual tempo. Tempo is something Cynic's Design talks about in his amazing video, accurately titled Tempo. So I wanted to expand on his explanation a little bit and hopefully make it a little easier to understand. So what I want to do for the sake of explaining this is separate your desired tempo and your actual tempo. So your desired tempo is like what we were just talking about. It's where you work most comfortably. It's kind of a subconscious level. You can't really define or actively think about what tempo you work best at, but you may develop an idea over time by recognizing what your actual tempo is when you're drawing really well. So your actual tempo is like the manifest. It's the speed you're currently working at. And when they're both aligned, you're in a flow state. But maybe you go to draw and you're just having a really terrible drawing day. It's probably because your tempos are misaligned and you're just not drawing at the speed to produce your best, nice looking work. So how can you practice getting better at tempo? Well, here, this exercise is definitely heavily influenced by Cynic's, but really what you want to do, I personally like to start with a couple spirals just to warm up. You could see I was doing those over my intro screen. But really you're kind of just filling your canvas with a very relaxed drawing style. you don't think too much about your shapes or lines at all, just kind of oscillating between your quick swooping lines across the screen and small focal points, and just letting it really flow, whatever feels right. And maybe you'll end up with some kind of product from that, some interesting idea. Like here, this ends up being like a spaceship with a city planted in its belly. So it's really, you're not going in with a thought at all. You're just kind of letting it flow out. And then after you've done that, as you can see through these previous drawings, I would go through with a red pen and circle areas where I had poor flow, where things were disconnected or they led the eye poorly. So when you're doing the exercise itself, you don't want to be thinking at all, or very much at all. But after you finish each quick series of drawings, so I don't know, each of these only took me a minute or two, then I'll spend a minute looking at it and trying to see what I did wrong, so that when I do the next one, I can make an improvement, or just kind of recognize in my mind that I should try to avoid those. So here I just have a quick lightning round. These are on like 5 times speed, but the original clips were on real time because I wanted to show you like the actual speed that I was drawing at, so you could get a feeling for where I sit most comfortably. And it just makes sense to be drawing in real time for a video about tempo. I think that using this exercise that we just discussed is a really great way to warm up before a big study session or drawing session, since you could do 5 or 6 drawings in like 10 minutes and help get you in a flow state by just drawing without thinking. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 1 on tempo. Let's jump into chapter 2, which is all about shapes and shape design. All right, shapes. When it comes to shape design, I think simplicity is king. You want to avoid having a lot of crazy complexity in your shapes, because it gets too crazy for the eye to look at, and you can't really, it's hard to follow the forms around the piece and unite your shapes into a cohesive design if they're too complicated and they have all these like jagged pointed edges going all over the place. So the first thing I want to do when talking about shapes is categorize them as organic and inorganic. So starting with organic shapes, these are asymmetric. They're offset angles and curves. They have offset angles and curves, and they lack symmetry across their axes. Organic shapes can be made of hard edges, not just curves. The natural movement of them comes from the uniqueness and asymmetry. So you can see with this demonstration right here, I've pushed the axis at an angle, and it's created movement. It's created a dynamic piece, a dynamic shape. So that's the main part of organic shapes. You really want to work with wide, obtuse angles here, because when you make a lot of acute angles and they're all over the place, that leads your eye to that point. You can see I'm going through and I'm circling these different acute angles. If I had acute angles in like 3 or 4 different directions in the shape, the eye would have no idea where to go. It would be led all over the place. You can use hard edges and sharper corners, more square shapes, to stop the flow. I like to try and make shapes as directional as I can and use a mix of pinch and stretch lines. So you can see maybe I have one side's a lot of obtuse angles, and then it comes to, there's a center point that's kind of pinched. That creates a bit of tension in the shape and gives it more visual interest. Basing your shapes on the two main types of curves, which are C and S curves, are the ideal way to create any sort of shape. You can see in these examples, a lot of them have very clear C and S curves. You can really make those very abstract. Like this shape in the center of the screen here is kind of an abstract C curve where it just barely has 2 points that are curved and the rest of the shape is very, very blocky. But it has enough obtuse angles that it kind of doesn't have a disconnected lead for the eye. So that's kind of the cliff notes on organic shapes. What about inorganic shapes? Well, they're the opposite. They're symmetric, they're balanced, and they're geometric. They're the shapes that feel man-made. They couldn't exist in nature because they don't have any noise or variability. All their axes are perfectly aligned. And I'm doing these more complex inorganic shapes to demonstrate that having curves and swoops in the shape does not make it organic. It's the asymmetry across axes that makes it organic. Like this vase is a very inorganic man-made shape, not because of the lines it's made with, but because of how they're set with each other. So here I'm doing a quick demonstration to offset the axes to just make these shapes look a little more organic so you can better understand what I'm talking about. So now that you have a decent understanding of what organic and inorganic shapes are, let's move on to an exercise to help you use shapes and create a cohesive design language. So just go crazy here. Let yourself go nuts. Build your shapes off S curves and C curves. Push them. Make them extremely dramatic, extremely abstract. Do curved lines and arcs, and do geometric shapes with obtuse angles. Just have as much fun with it as you can. You really want to avoid patterns here. Avoiding shapes that are similar within each other. This first design that I did, the bottom two shapes are a very, very similar S curve, and they lead in a very similar way. So I would want to make note of that and try and avoid doing that in the future. Here is another example where I'm focusing mostly on curved shapes as opposed to the more like industrial hard edge shapes. And here I've put a lot of acute angles, and they're all focusing into the same point. So you can kind of break the rules that I'm setting to create good visual interest. If your shapes are following the classic design principles of big, medium, small, and you're breaking the acute angle rule and your shapes are just all pointing into the same place, that's okay. You know, if there's a purpose for it, then I say let it happen, because you can create a very visually interesting piece by morphing these rules and suiting them to what you want to do. And doing an exercise like this, where you're really just working with these shapes to try and understand a organization of them so they fit together to create like a synchronous whole, that is going to serve you really well when you go to work on a full piece and a composition, and you can tie this idea together. So here I like to go back and forth between doing more curvy shapes and then more industrial shapes, and then I'll like mix the two different shapes together. You can see here the second design that I did on the right has a very clear direction, and it's very spiraling in its design as a whole, not just with each shape individually. So if you kind of pick a design language for the sequence of shapes, that can be really helpful to make it look cohesive. Another thing that I want to make note of when doing this is try to use a inorganic shape to serve as a focal point. Inorganic shapes are a really great way to break the rest of the design and make a really clear focal point. Like this sequence I'm doing right here, I put in a perfect circle at the base, and that just draws your eye to it because it's so like man-made. Same with this square in the center of these very curvy shapes spiraling outward from it. Using an inorganic shape mixed with organic shapes just helps you to really apply the concept of creating a single flow and understanding how you can use hard and soft edges to make your eyes follow around whatever you're designing. So that wraps up what I want to say about shapes. Let's move on to flow. It's kind of hard to talk about any of these topics without talking about each of the other ones. That's why I kind of wanted to put them in a video and give you an introduction to these concepts. So flow, I was talking a lot about in the previous chapter about when I was talking about shapes and how they flow together in a composition. This is not the same flow as the flow state of tempo. It's your compositional flow. It's more of how your shapes in a scene are interacting with each other to create a united single image. When you're creating flow, it's important to avoid patterns. You want to try and create an impression of randomness, which is very difficult, and you will see me fail repeatedly to do so. However, the purpose it serves is creating more visual interest and allows your eyes to flow through the composition of shapes easier without getting stuck anywhere. So if I have a lot of sequential shapes and similar patterns, my eye will just follow through that piece and look at those sequences and those pairs of shapes instead of just kind of gliding across it and moving through. So doing sequences of bubbles, squares, or leaves. Leaves are very difficult because they're much more directional and more of a complex shape than circles or squares. Those are kind of the three things that I want to focus on, or I want you to focus on, to try and better understand how you use shapes in your composition for everything to really flow nicely and just look gorgeous. So in the exercise I want you to try, you'll basically be doing the same exact exercise 3 different times with a different type of object. Because it hits like a dual practice point. It'll help you do your arcs, your ellipses, your straight lines, and your S-curves. And I think it's really awesome if you can have an exercise that practices your flow, but also helps you be comfortable working with your little lines. And that makes this another great exercise to warm up with or just to study. So I would say when you want to exercise your flow, do like 3 to 9 sequences, and again, analyze and circle your weak points like you can see me doing throughout the video. Understand where you're making patterns and try to avoid those in the next sequence. So I think it's really helpful to draw a flow line and have your shapes follow along that line. You can see here, this is my first iteration of doing a sequence with leaves, and I was having a really hard time with this center. You can see me clearing it out and redrawing it like 3 or 4 different times before I get a directional flow and a good hierarchy of shapes. I did forget to mention before, this exercise is really exceptional for practicing your usage of big, medium, small, because you're focusing on a single type of shape along a directional path. So just naturally to create a nice composition in the sequence, you're going to need to use big, medium, small in a random patternless way. This second sequence is much better, but you can still see there's multiple pairings of shapes that are the same size next to each other. So in my third sequence, I'm going to go and try to avoid doing that again. I'm still struggling to make those leaves kind of really flow together, and I'm end up going back and making some tweaks to the size of the leaves. With the leaves, it's especially difficult. If you're doing a number of sequences, I would recommend doing the leaves last once you've kind of warmed up a little more. I think that'll help to organize what you're going to do a little better. With the leaves, if they're very close in size or you're having a hard time telling what's going on, you can draw circles around them and label them as big, medium, small to help you see if you created patterns within that sequence. That's a really useful way to dissect what you're doing and give yourself a little bit better understanding of what patterns you're creating. And then I just do a couple more iterations here with circles, and it's okay to make them overlap with each other. I think you end up with a lot more interesting sequences if you do allow yourself to overlap. And I would try and avoid erasing or clearing out as much as possible. But if you see an opportunity to fix it, or you just really want to get it right, then it makes sense to do so. Another thing you can do here is using a collection of small shapes, like you see me do with these boxes, to create a focal point within the sequence. That's another really great way to practice your compositional skills. All right, so that wraps up chapter 3. Let's jump into a summary and really define your artistic intuition. Well, I just recorded this whole last section and then realized that I wasn't recording. So here's take 2, I guess. So this is artistic intuition. First, I want to talk about industrial design, which you can see is what I'm doing here. It's really key here to utilize inorganic shapes to hard stop the flow of the piece, and then work with your organic shapes, focusing more on the hard edges and obtuse angles than curves to create gesture and movement even within mech design. Mechs have always been something really interesting to me. I don't really post them much at all, but they do hold a special place in my heart. I used to do a lot of industrial design. I have sketchbooks filled with humanoid, military, and like construction focused robots, mech suits, all that kind of fun stuff. So it was really fun for me making this video to kind of go back through a little bit and use some of that industrial design as a demonstration for how you can create nice compositions with your shapes and really unify all the concepts of this videos together. Before I really define artistic intuition and wrap up this video, I want to mention how you can use a mix of inorganic and organic shapes within humanoid or animal designs. Some really great artists here are Muka, who does a lot of figures, or did a lot of figures with really amazing gesture, and use these inorganic shapes in the background to outline the silhouette and create a very stunning point, very stunning focal point, and create a lot of visual interest, especially highlighting like the edges of the face and tying a whole piece together. I'll try to throw a couple of Muka's illustrations up while I'm editing the video. So playing with flow and shapes will really help you to be a better designer as a whole, and building your visual library will let your designs flow smoothly and feel more aesthetically pleasing, which ties perfectly into a rounded definition of artistic intuition, which is really like your ability to deconstruct what you already know at a subconscious level. Your brain knows when something is aesthetic to a more complex degree than we can really explain or demonstrate. And the purpose of the exercises that I've proposed in this video is to let your intuition guide your hand more. A master artist is extremely skilled at this. They just don't talk about it because it's on the subconscious level. It's not something you actively think about where you're drawing. The hours of time that you put into drawing is what makes you really good at tempo, really good at flow, really good at shape design. I'm really thankful to Cynics for proposing these abstract concepts in a academic setting, and that really, his work really inspired me to create my own video on it. So I hope that you'll go check out his stuff, and that you also get something useful from what I've had to say throughout this video. These last two sets of drawings that I've been doing here are kind of the final exercise, I would say. Once you've done a couple of the other exercises and you're warmed up and ready to do a finished drawing, a more finished drawing, something that has some substance to it, that isn't just lines or random shapes, try to do some industrial design for those of you more interested in that. Again, really pushing the inorganic shapes as focal points and stopping your flow to give like a really like strong, imposing impression. And for those of you who want to do figures, try to use some really creative organic shapes, like I've done with this gentleman in the bottom left. His eyebrows and his nose, they have a lot of acute angles in them, but they're a nice mix of big, medium, small, and they kind of give the impression of it being hair. And his nose is all like jagged, and it's just very visually interesting, and it gives him like a very rugged look. And then I throw in an inorganic shape in the background to just highlight the side of his face that I want your eyes to focus on. So that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to talk about. This video has gotten kind of on the longer side, but I feel like everything within it is very interrelated. So I wanted to introduce you to all of it at once. If you like what I'm doing here and you want to support me, please consider checking out my Patreon or my Etsy shop, where I sell prints and original sketches. That's a huge help to me to keep making this content. A quick update about the channel as a whole. I decided to give myself 2 weeks to create each video so I can spend more time outlining what I want to talk about and research the topics further. I know this is more edited than my usual content, but with the educational nature, I think it's warranted. I decided to cut the face cam as well. I think it's more distracting than beneficial, both for me when recording the video, and I'm guessing that it kind of pulls your guys' attention off what I'm demonstrating. Let me know if you agree in the comments. All right. Thank you so much for watching. And with that, I love you all. Please take care.